film you're about to view is a short documentary on the life of Roger Sperry. The documentary focuses on his college years and beyond, featuring his work on nerve regeneration and his Nobel Prize-winning research on the split brain technique. The video also includes an interview with Sperry's biographer, Antonio Puente.
Roger Walcott Sperry was born on August 20th, 1913, in a small suburb of Hartford, Connecticut. Sperry's early education was in Elmwood, Connecticut. Later, he attended William Hall High School in Hartford. From there, he went on to attend Oberlin College, where he obtained a bachelor's in English and a master's in psychology. Sperry subsequently received a doctoral degree in zoology from the University of Chicago. Following his doctoral work, Sperry served as a National Research Council Fellow at Harvard University.
I started working through one of his colleagues, or his last postdoctoral fellow, Polly Henninger, and after working through her, I started working directly with him in conjunction with one of my former students, Heather Griffith, who went to California to help dismantle the lab and learn some other things about his work. And it's at that point that the relationship changed and we started working more closely, and that continued until his death in the spring of 1994. I became interested in his work for two reasons. First of all, his work on left brain, right brain was so straightforward and interesting. It was hard to see anything in the neuropsychological literature that was so straight to the point and elegant and simplistic as well as powerful. That was one thing. The second thing is that he's one of the few people that I knew at the time, and still, who was both an excellent scientist as well as a philosopher. And I was always interested in that part of things, and the combination of the two really was fantastic. So that really is what brought me to him.
Sperry's professional career began as a research fellow in biology at Harvard. He also worked at Yerkes Laboratories of Primate Biology before taking a position as assistant professor in the Department of Anatomy at the University of Chicago. Later, while working as an associate professor in the psychology department at Chicago, Sperry served as the section chief of neurological diseases and blindness at the National Institutes of Health. Sperry's professional career came to fruition at the California Institute of Technology, where he served as Hickson Professor of Psychobiology for the duration of his working life.
The original focus again was to help him publish his book, which unfortunately never occurred. And what I did later on was to learn information about him. What I did for him, I'm not entirely sure. That's a question, of course, maybe we'll never know the answer to. But I think he enjoyed having, he enjoyed the companionship, the intellectual companionship, and I think he also was hoping that somehow his ideas would be more widely disseminated because of that relationship.
Sperry's research on nerve regeneration using muscle and nerve transplantation in rats, salamanders, and monkeys, and optic nerve regeneration in frogs, salamanders, and fish was among his many accomplishments.
The first work involved the regeneration of severed nerves, and that involved motor and sensory nerves and a variety of species. Subsequent to that, he went to pursue further the work of equipotentiality of his second supervisor or mentor, Carl Lashley. And there he came up with some specific test strategies to question the validity of what Lashley had come up with.
Sperry took the nerves from the hind legs of rats and switched them, putting the nerves from the left leg into the right leg and the nerves from the right leg into the left leg. Through these experiments, Sperry proved that when nerve connections were rearranged, inappropriate responses resulted that could not be unlearned. Basically, the stimulation of the right foot caused the rat to move his left foot, and no training or experience could be done to change the response. The research using frogs showed similar results. Sperry showed that individual nerve fibers behave independently from each other. For example, in an animal whose optic nerves have been severed and its eye rotated in its socket, there is no reorganization of the neural circuits. This causes the animal to view the world upside down and backwards without the possibility of relearning or through experience changing the behavior. The animal will inevitably strike to the left when it sees a fly on its right, and to the right if the fly is on the left. The conclusion of these studies reveal that the circuitry of the brain is fixed during early development. The results of the chemical individuality of each nerve fiber has now been proven through modern molecular methods. Furthermore, his research has given way to a field of research focusing on axonal guidance.
This is the first time he took a jump into the central nervous system, working initially with monkeys and cats and subsequently with humans.
In 1981, Dr. Sperry received the Nobel Prize for his research on split brain activity.
Keep in mind that the original work was done on cats and subsequently monkeys before it was actually started in a dozen or so humans. The difficulty in cats and monkeys, of course, is that they don't share much of their knowledge because they don't communicate in the same way that we do. So the question that Sperry had was best answered by doing human research. The problem arose, unfortunately. How do you cut people's brains in half? It's a very difficult thing to do ethically and otherwise. Actually, even technically speaking, it's a very challenging surgery. So once that was resolved, the questions then became clear to ask and the answers became very, very straightforward.
The research showed that if the two hemispheres were separated by severing the corpus callosum, there would no longer be a transfer of information. Furthermore, the research proved that each hemisphere was capable of functioning on its own. Sperry began his testing on cats and monkeys. Later, he also studied humans who had been suffering with epilepsy.
There was a perceived role of the corpus callosum and it involved whether it actually had any role besides just holding the two hemispheres together. So he's very interested in that. The second issue has to do with the development of understanding of the hemispheres. So that was his the major concern that he had that resulted in his pioneering work on split brain. What was probably not as well understood is the importance of realizing that the two hemispheres together played an immense role, much more so than only one hemisphere. So one hemisphere alone was productive in a specific sort of way, but two hemispheres working in unison or in congruence then produced the complex behavior that we call consciousness.
Through his work with these patients, Sperry was able to demonstrate the presence of a conscious mind in each hemisphere. The left hemisphere controls speech and is dominant in writing and mathematical calculations. The right hemisphere is incapable of verbal communication, but excels in spatial comprehension and nonverbal concept formation.
I think he believed that the most important thing he could say involved understanding that values were critical in determining the outcome of human nature, and that values should be based not on philosophical or ideological concepts, but very specific, empirically based ideas. So in other words, that values should be scientifically driven.
Through his research, Sperry devised methods of communicating with the right hemisphere which had previously been thought of as being unconscious. Sperry found that, though separated, both hemispheres were still capable of learning, but they could not share the knowledge. For example, a patient with a severed corpus callosum was asked to replicate a drawing of a cross and a box that were located in the middle of a page. Even though the patient was right-handed, he was not capable of reproducing the drawings with his right hand, which is controlled by the left hemisphere. The patient was, however, able to replicate the drawing with his left hand fairly well, since it is controlled by the right hemisphere.
There's several things that I think are important. One of them is the fact that he was a person. He was not just a scientist. He was a father. He was a husband. He was a fisherman. He was one of the great collectors of fossils in the 20th century, at least amateur fossil collectors of a certain kind specifically. So there's a human side. He was an artist as well. He enjoyed square dancing and enjoyed parties and drank alcohol and enjoyed the company of his students and so forth. So there's a person behind the ideas. The other thing is that the thing that's most interesting to me about Sperry was his perseverance, his vision, and his eloquence. It was unusual for someone to have such a long term view or vision of the world, and tie it in together with eloquent and simple ideas that just resonated, and furthermore that those ideas were tied to empirical information. That's unheard of. At times he believed that he was instrumental in establishing this thing we often refer to as a cognitive revolution, which began in the 60s, and if he was critical in developing it, he certainly wanted to get credit, or at least get his ideas at the forefront. And furthermore, he thought that these ideas or these changes that were occurring in the 60s and 70s, which were psychological more than anything else, could be attributable to a much needed change along the lines of Galileo and Copernicus. So he was setting his sights very, very, very high, and I think in many ways he achieved them.
His work led to the publication of over 300 articles. Meanwhile, he led an apparently normal life. Sperry had a wife and 2 children, and reportedly went home for lunch each day. Lunch was followed by a nap, then back to work.
His importance is a difficult one to understand, largely because he didn't really work in any one particular area. For example, he's the only psychologist to win a Nobel Prize, even though this year somebody who's a professor of psychology also won a Nobel Prize, but his training was, I believe, not in psychology. The other thing is that he didn't teach in the psychology department, and he taught instead of in biology division at California Institute of Technology, and even then he was a fish out of water. So his significance really is not in one particular area as much as across several areas, and the major one I would probably say is neuropsychology or neuroscience, with psychology and philosophy being second level for him.
Sperry's work had a tremendous impact across disciplines. Sperry's research provided a foundation for much additional study and is highly referenced today.
His research on nerve regeneration is extremely critical and not well understood by the average psychologist, but it really is the foundation for modern neurological thinking and the development of a new field called neurogenesis. So he's very critically acclaimed, and his work is very important in biology and neuroscience in that category. In terms of psychology and maybe the population at large, his work on split brain is really widely understood. As a matter of fact, I think you'd find that somebody with adequate intelligence and some education probably knows the difference between left and right brain, but would not necessarily know that it was about Sperry. The third thing that I think it's really well understood, again, not necessarily given credit to him, is his idea of consciousness and macrodeterminism as well as microdeterminism. It's something that I think that the average person believes in, but does not necessarily articulate it as having associated with his theory of brain function. In terms of psychology, there's still continuing work on left brain, right brain. The hemisphericity work is just so part of the psychological landscape, scientific landscape, that continues. And the philosophical front, the development of a sort of a sub-branch of philosophy called neurophilosophy, the idea that the brain has some impact in how mind thinks, is now commonplace. The works of people like Pat Churchland and others provides further evidence to this. Clearly, the impact is wide-ranging. If you look at Sperry on the psych-lit, or if you look at left brain, right brain, or left-right, in the last 30, 40 years, you'll see a huge number of articles relative to those that are published in psychology. So he certainly has had an impact beyond what we could have expected. Will his impact go the ways of the history books or the ways of dead journal articles? Only time will tell.
The strength of Sperry's work is apparent and remains highly influential. Researchers continue to reference his work and expand on his ideas.
Sperry's research is one of the most cited research projects in the history of psychology. Sometimes impact is based on how many times a research project has been cited by colleagues, and in his case, a couple of his articles are in the top 5 of research articles cited by other psychologists. So clearly he's had a great impact.
As of 2002, Roger Sperry is the only psychologist to have received a Nobel Prize. His groundbreaking research in nerve regeneration showed us that the circuitry of our brains is fixed in early development. His revolutionary research on split brain activity demonstrated the ability of the two hemispheres to act independently. However, that very independence, coupled with the delegation of tasks, necessitates the clear communication between the two hemispheres. The depth of Roger Sperry's findings almost certainly guarantees the ongoing cross-disciplinary discussion for years to come.